Imagine, just for a moment, you're an old fart and your kids are telling you it's time to go into a home. And they send you to somewhere called Manor Care. Doesn't look much like a manor to you, but you get your pudding in a cup every day from the nice nurse and there's activities. And then suddenly, the activities start disappearing. And the pudding is replaced with, I don't know, rocks. And the nice nurse is replaced with roaches and ants. And nobody's wiping your butt anymore. You're told it's all because of some guy named Carlisle. HCR Manor Care was once the second largest nursing home chain in America, and across the country it cared for residents both old and older, and it did at least an okay job of it. That is, until it was bought out by the Carlyle Group in 2007, one of the richest private equity firms in the world. Shortly after, Manor Care began laying off hundreds of workers, that is, nurses, instituting cost-cutting programs, and health code violations spiked. Visitors reported that it was like a dirty, run-down motel full of roaches and ants. Patients got sick, were injured, were neglected, and died at higher rates than ever before because of worse care and fewer staff. Overdoses, bed sores, and broken bones was what the Washington Post expose said. But because the Carlyle Group didn't technically own HCR Manor Care, technically, it advised a series of investment funds that invested in it, it was shielded from the zillions of lawsuits launched against it for how horribly it treated its patients. And when it finally filed for bankruptcy, the Carlyle Group made off with $1.6 billion, $61 million in profit, noting that, quote, not a single creditor lost a single penny as a result of the bankruptcy filing. But it's not sweet old Granny Ethel dealing with secret takeovers by private equity companies. It's the planet, and it's also all of us. But first, a word from our sponsor.
Hey you! Yeah, you stupid idiot. Want to get rich quick? Of course you do, stupid. Here's how. Step 1. Buy a company. I know, you can't afford to buy a company, but you don't have to. Through the magic of leveraging other people's money. You don't need to risk any of your own money. It's really the banks, the investors, the pensioners taking the risk for you. That's the leveraged part of leveraged buyout. And once you've borrowed enough money, scoop up that mid-sized restaurant chain, I don't know, we'll call it Appleseas. Step 2, congratulations, you've bought Appleseas. But now you have all that debt. Don't worry, it's not your debt anymore. That's Appleseas' debt. Now it's their responsibility to pay off all the money that you spent acquiring them. That's called debt transfer and servicing. How does it work? Don't worry about it. Is it legal? Don't worry about it. It's time to get you paid. Step 3, get paid. You make more money if it's profitable, but don't worry, whether or not your company is profitable, and since you bought it for so little money, it probably isn't. You still win. Step 4, cut costs. Who needs environmental regulations, safety protocols, competent or well-paid staff, or pensions? Not you, you rich guy. Step 5, uh-oh, all that debt's gotten to be a bit too much for Appleseas. Plus, a couple of customers might have been suing us for a little bit of E. coli that got into their casserole. Don't worry, you don't technically own the company, and you already got your bag. The company declares bankruptcy, you get away scot-free with a couple billy to spend on your next leveraged buyout. God bless America.
Oh, right. I don't have any sponsors. Oh well, I'm Hazel. One time I got a B+ in finance in 2018, and this is how private equity is destroying the world. And also, I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist, so I bought a corkboard about it. Anyway, let's take a gander at old Manor Care and figure out exactly what went wrong and how exactly private equity firms will gut companies to make a quick buck.
And listen also, for the haters and the nitpickers out there, I know private equity is a broad term, okay? I am talking specifically about leveraged buyout companies, which is the name they used to go by before their marketing departments kind of noticed how evil of a name that sounded like.
So first off, when the Carlyle Group acquired Manor Care, it took on a whole lot of debt. But through the power of debt transfer and debt servicing, I hope you did your homework because there's going to be a pop quiz, they were able to transfer all that debt to Manor Care. Expensive to be bought out by a giant company. Now, that's a lot of debt, but that by itself wasn't enough to fully cripple Manor Care. The Carlyle Group also sold off all of Manor Care's assets, that is, its literal care homes. Now that's expensive in the long run, you know, they gotta pay leases on homes they used to own, but the Carlyle Group got a short-term windfall from all the extra money from the sales, to the tune of $500 million. is that right? It says check here because that doesn't seem right. This is called sale-leasebacks, which is a business word. It also extracted all kinds of fees from ManorCare, like transaction fees and advisory fees, you know, to pay for all the invaluable guidance and services that they provided for ManorCare. Finally, because the Carlyle executives weren't getting paid fast enough, ManorCare borrowed even more money to pay them those fat dividends. Now, for all two of you who own stocks, you're probably like, hold on, Hazel. Dividends usually only get paid if the company is making a profit. So surely, ManorCare must have been profitable. Well, go back to business school, Buster, because it turns out that private equity-owned companies often have to borrow money to pay off their overlords. This is called dividend recapitalization, or recaps, because it happens so much, they had to come up with a shorthand for it. This is the other shorthand for it, by the way. Now, with all those fees, rents, and loans to pay, ManorCare didn't have a whole lot of money left over for little things like staff, or medicine, or keeping their patients from getting sick and dying. Some ManorCares were reduced to one nurse for every 60 patients. It turns out that across the US, private equity-owned nursing homes have 1,000 more deaths per year, and their patients are 11% more likely to have serious health issues or have to go to the emergency room. Hence, the article. And if I sound like a total cold, unfeeling bitch about this whole thing, well, it turns out once you learn a certain amount about economics or climate change or the world around you, this is just sort of how you sound when you're talking about atrocities. And then when all of the liabilities and lawsuits and, you know, losses piled up, Carlyle Group disappeared in a puff of smoke and ManorCare went bankrupt. Now, obviously that sounds pretty bad. Sucks to be Grandma Ethel. But, well, it turns out the entire planet is just kinda one big private equity-owned care home. And we're all little old ladies stuck in our wheelchairs now, baby. Now, I could try to explain the nitty-gritty about the inner financial workings of private equity, like the loopholes and the fee structures, and yes, see, you're already falling asleep. Because first of all, it's boring. And second of all, it's confusing. Not even Wikipedia can do it without having a big honking warning at the top being like,
Don't even try.
But the idea behind private equity isn't that hard to understand. It's kind of noble, or at least purely capitalist. Buy a failing or bloated business, fix it up, lay off a few redundancies, you streamline business practices, profit equals revenue minus expenses, or whatever the fuck else they teach in business school, and you sell it for a profit. Everybody wins. People usually compare it to house flipping, except in practice, it's a little bit more like you buy a house that somebody else was already living in, you sell all the shit in it, you tear out the floorboards and the pipes, you sell the kids, and then the people still living in it pay your mortgage. And then you blow it up at the end. You sell it. Maybe not at a profit, but at least you profited. But what exactly is a private equity firm? I know, we're insert minutes here in before I start explaining what it actually is. They are any investment funds that acquire or invest in other companies and are not listed on the public stock market, meaning we know a lot less about them than we do about public investment funds or public companies. So if they're not on the stock market, where do they get their investment from? First off, rich guys who invest their money hoping for a quick turnaround. Second off, big institutions like universities and banks. I forgot about this, but other countries like Saudi Arabia and their sovereign wealth funds, which is a whole thing. Banks, aka you. Pensions, aka you. All these guys will invest in private equity companies hoping for a quick profit. And the reason the profits are quick is because instead of investing in the company and growing it, making good business decisions, they do this shit instead. Which is why experts use the words plunder a lot, because it's, you know, it's apt. And private equity is doing more and more plundering and or pillaging every single year. Uh-oh, what's that blip in 2008? Who knows? Not foreshadowing. And that's probably why after a long day of working out at 24-Hour Fitness, getting my ears pierced at Claire's, buying an Aeropostale bra and some True Religion jeans, having dinner at Red Lobster, taking my cat to Toys R Us before hitting up Radio Shack, and then having a nap at the Mattress Firm, I was in such a bad Dude, the services at all those places was terrible, and half of them don't even exist anymore. Maybe that's because they all went bankrupt after being bought out by private equity companies. Coincidence? No. 2/3 of companies that filed for bankruptcy in 2016 and 2017 were owned by private equity, and private equity-owned companies are 10 times more likely to file for bankruptcy, or you can just look at this. Whoo boy, wowie. And the reason is always the same: too much debt burden. After cutting staff and services and products and everything else, they still can't even cover the interest for their debt. Remember Toys R Us? By the time it folded, they were burdened by $3 billion in debt by the private equity firm KKR, and 97% of their profits were going to loan interest. If they didn't have all that debt, they could have spent that money, you know, expanding, modernizing, maybe having some kind of online presence, making their commercials even more unhinged.
Stop right there.
Before these companies go bankrupt, they do everything they can to cut costs to pay their new owners. Employees also suffer. Under private equity, they get fewer raises, worse health benefits, lose their pensions, have worse retirement plans, and then, of course, they get laid off like crazy. And even then, a lot of the times, it's not enough. So when these companies eventually do go bankrupt, every former employee will lose their pension or have their pensions cut. And current employees usually get cheated out of their severance one way or another. Meanwhile, because private equity firms have armies of lawyers specializing in bankruptcy, they get out just fine. Want to know just how good at bankruptcy they are? In 2021, PE company Sun Capital forgave its own debt. How does that work? In 2007, Friendly's was acquired by Sun Capital, and as per usual, loaded up with debt.
Hey, I'd like to go bankrupt, please. Our owner, Sun Capital, loaded us up with too much debt.
And who do you owe money to?
That guy with the mustache.
Isn't that also Sun Capital?
No, not me. I have a little mustache on.
Okay. But it also turns out that the company who owned all of Friendly's debt in the first place was also a subsidiary of Sun Capital. What a crazy random happenstance. The Sun Capital subsidiary acquired Friendly's through a credit bid.
Anyway, we'd like to go bankrupt and sell ourselves off at an auction, you know, to whoever.
Crazy idea. But what if I bought you by forgiving all your debt through a credit bid?
That sounds like a great deal to me.
So Sun Capital saved millions of dollars, but not just that. It got the government to cover all of its pensions. Before declaring bankruptcy, Sun Capital was on the hook for $115 million of pensions. But
since they went bankrupt, that means they don't have to pay the pensions, right? Because the taxpayer-funded Pension Board Guarantee Corporation is supposed to cover it for us.
I literally legally cannot say no. Adjourned. They used a little trick that saves Americans' pensions when their companies go under by dumping it on the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation.
Fuck this guy's pension specifically.
And that sounds crazy and like it wouldn't happen all the time, but it does. The PBGC has been so inundated by private equity companies selling their own companies back to themselves after those companies go bankrupt that they've had to cut $70 million in benefits.
Oh, also, they, and I quote, accused Friendly's and their counsel of proposing, quote, very funny and, quote, very cute and, quote, disingenuous legal positions in order to shed their obligations of pensions.
And they're not just acquiring companies all over the US. They're buying up and absorbing the profits from businesses in the UK, in Canada, and beyond. I didn't even know that Tim Hortons was owned by private equity, and then I thought about it for 30 seconds, and I was like, oh yeah, their donuts used to be made in-house, and now they have the texture of, like, wet cat litter. And sure-fucking enough. And you may be asking yourself, okay, Hazel, so what? Private equity killed off a mega mall's worth of retail stores, and now Canada's most famous coffee tastes like decrepit asshole. Big deal! Well, it's not just our beloved Red's Lobster getting gutted, it's healthcare, it's our utilities that we need to survive, like water and heat, it's private prisons, rehab facilities, nursing homes, in short, anywhere vulnerable people who rely on services can be found. So can private equity. But don't worry, they're ruining housing too!
When the bus moved and I...
America last year has now spread to every part of the world.
We're down 9% today, the Zetradang.
And long story short, a whole bunch of people lost their houses. And those houses were bought up by, I wonder who? Remember the foreshadowing? But instead of flipping those houses, you know, the way they'd flip companies, they were like, I'm pretty sure prospective buyers might notice that we took the floorboards and that we sold their kids. So instead of flipping them, let's rent them out. And so it became that single-family houses were for renters. Now across the US, 1/3 of all rentals are single-family homes. And those homes have skyrocketing rents, insane fees, and much, much higher rates of eviction. And sure, buying up a couple McMansions in Tallahassee, Florida might not seem like that big of a deal, but they take the profit that they extract from renters and use it to lobby against tenant protection, making the housing and rental markets shittier and more expensive for basically everybody. In California, Prop 10 went to a vote, which would allow localities to decide whether or not rent stabilization laws would apply to single-family homes, and not just those apartment renters up in their rent-controlled ivory towers. The vote no on Prop 10 fund spent twice as much as the rent control supporters. So, of course, the proposition failed miserably. Ow, that went on my thumbnail. That's what I get for being too violent with my Fs. And also, I didn't know where to put this, but dog deaths at PetSmart doubled after they were acquired by private equity in 2015. This puppy's fine. It's a stock photo. Relax. But yeah, dead puppies. And okay, sure, private equity's evil. It hollows out businesses, it screws over its employees, customers, taxpayers, it makes it impossible for you to own a home, and it kills your grandma and your puppies. But I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm a single-issue voter. What about the climate? Well, shockingly to nobody, private equity's kind of bad for the climate too. Might actually be worse than the biggest oil companies combined. Between 2010 and 2022, they invested a face-melting $1.1 trillion into fossil fuels. That is double the market value of Exxon, Chevron, and Royal Dutch Shell combined. I mean, it makes sense. It's an industry that specifically cares about short-term profits over long-term consequences. Well, what's shorter term and higher profit than trashing the biosphere that sustains human life for a quick buck?
That business model of outsized profits over a short amount of time is just not compatible with a just and responsible and effective transition to renewable energy sources.
That's Matt Parr from the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. I used a ton of their research for this part of the video, so shout out to Private Equity Stakeholder Project, shout out to Matt.
See, big oil companies, they've been under a lot of scrutiny in the last few years. I personally wouldn't know anything about that. People want to regulate them, sue them, tax them, shut them down, firebomb them. That one might just be me. All roads lead to forcing them to reduce their emissions one way or another. Now imagine you're Exxon or BP. Now you could install smokestack scrubbers and invest your money into clean energy, and maybe that would be like good for the planet and prevent the sixth extinction and pull humanity back from the brink of devastation. And it might even be profitable in the long run. But you're Exxon, you don't care about the long run. So instead you sell off your absolutely filthiest, dirtiest, nastiest, pollutinist assets to none other than the bottomest of the bottom feeders themselves. That's right, the fucking Carlyle Group. And now you can say, look, we're BP, we slashed 16% of our emissions by selling them to these guys. But it's not like these emissions go away. They're just hidden from view behind layers and layers of bullshit and obfuscation.
Private equity firms operate in a very shadowy, opaque part of our economy.
But that once these ugly, oil-soaked ducklings are adopted by private equity, their emissions get a lot worse. Like a lot worse. This is called the transferred emissions problem. So after BP sold off that massive amount of emissions, that is their Alaska operations, to Hilcorp, their pipeline spills increased by 30%, their emissions skyrocketed, and this is pretty much always the story when an operation is transferred from a public company to a private company.
So cutting costs where they can, sometimes cutting corners in order to do that, and trying to pump profit out of an entity and then getting out of there once they've made their profit.
And this is how bad these dudes are. They make big oil look like the good guys. I'm out here writing for oil companies. What the fuck is going on? The big issue with the transferred emissions problem is that there's much less scrutiny. They can straight up lie about their emissions, which are sometimes 6,500 times what they're reporting to their shareholders. Because what, are their shareholders the cops? What are they gonna do about it? And private equity companies are entering more deals with fossil fuels than ever. Dirty assets are flowing from public to private markets at a significant and accelerating rate.
Over the years, we've seen a higher trend of private equity firms acquiring billions of dollars of oil and gas assets from public markets.
And those dirty assets are also being sold from companies with environmental commitments to companies that don't care. And speaking of dirtiest assets, hey, remember coal? Like how on top of poisoning communities and cooking the planet worse than any other fuel, it's also straight up not even profitable? Well, that means they're getting sold off in a quote-unquote bonanza. Because, like I said earlier, PE firms don't care if their assets are profitable. They care if they can extract as much short-term value as possible. So, that means such illustrious private equities as Blackstone and ArcLight are keeping these zombie coal plants open, spewing crap into the atmosphere and into our lungs for years to come. If you take the fact that private equity is accumulating more and more oil, gas, and coal assets than ever before, combine it with everything we know about their cost-cutting, mistreatment of patients and employees, their literal crime-doing, and their absolute absence of accountability, the fact that they can disappear when times get tough, and you get way, way, way more climate damage happening behind the scenes than we can ever possibly know.
Matt also alerted me to the fact that, just like with the nursing homes or the pensions, private equity is uniquely positioned to sneak out the door after finishing all their oil drilling or whatever by declaring bankruptcy and leaving the taxpayer to pay for the cleanup.
And then they can kind of essentially wash their hands of the responsibility and the damage that fossil fuel infrastructure has made. They can go bankrupt and they need to be cleaned up, but the firm itself, because of the business model they've set up, is not actually liable for a lot of that.
So, does this whole rock-bottom fire sale of coal, oil, and gas assets to private equity, kind of like the Spirit Halloween sign over the empty mall that is the fossil fuel industry, did that analogy even make any sense? The answer to both these questions is, boy, I sure hope so. So far, PE oil companies are declaring bankruptcy a lot faster than the other ones, so yeah. You could argue that these fossil fuel companies should have either closed a long time ago or pivoted to clean energy, but instead they got bought by private equity.
And so then you have problems with these assets having been run way past their expiration date, still running and then not being cleaned up or transitioned to a more renewable source.
So I don't know. I guess all we can do now is hope that Elon Musk buys ExxonMobil and puts everybody out of their misery. On the other hand, we have funds that do realize that renewables are a better bet. And of course, Republicans have them in their crosshairs, denouncing them as,
I don't think there's any worse woke than woke capitalism. That's the bastard child of greed and ideology, man. It's some sort of monster.
Like, dudes can't even lose all their money anymore buying a coal plant because of woke. Thanks, Joe Biden. But the thing is, renewables are a better financial bet. On a global scale, they're more reliable, which sounds weird because the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow. Aren't renewables unreliable? Well, renewable energy, first of all, is the cheapest energy in history, and its value and cost isn't dependent upon giant, highly protested pipelines getting finished or the whims of a global oil cartel that can basically single-handedly set prices, or a world superpower losing its fucking mind. No matter what, the sun will shine, and the wind will blow, and the waves will wave, and the atoms will split, controversial. And the geothermal will geothermal. So not only is renewable energy a better investment for the planet, it's literally a better investment even if global warming is some made-up, blue-haired conspiracy theory screeching. Not that I know anything about that. But unfortunately, because of the business model that makes private equity in the first place, it's not a better investment for them. It doesn't produce massive short-term windfalls of profits and relies more on labor, good jobs, than on capital. So bad for capitalists. So long story short, the granny-maiming, puppy-killing, planet-fucking private equity funds extract value that should have either gone to employees or customers, you know, normal people. But instead, they funnel it to the most rich and powerful. Even if profit is created, no actual value is created. If anything, it's siphoned off, making the wealth gap worse every day, and making private equity executives just disgustingly rich. Everyone else loses, especially the planet. So now what?
So I try not to make videos short or long about the horrors without telling you what you can do about it. So what can we do about it? Well, believe it or not, the US has dealt with this kind of thing before. You remember how people are calling this the Second Gilded Age? Well, like the World Wars and the Shreks, there's a secret, lesser known, first one. During the first Gilded Age, instead of private equity, we had money trusts. Now, there's a few key differences between them. But boy, is this video getting long. No, there's not. It's the same shit. Regulated giant firms buying up and gutting businesses. Money trusts were why the Gilded Age had such bad wealth inequality in the first place. Not as bad as this one, but I digress. You know the terms antitrust or trust busting? Well, that's where they come from, Buster, because as a result of populist progressive movements, both rural and urban, the trusts were, in fact, busted up into smaller companies, and a whole lot of regulations happened to keep it from happening again, which it didn't for almost 100 years. But the US government and others, as a result of public outcry, are at least trying to bust up the giant public companies. They haven't really been focusing so much on private equity. So what can you do? Well, you can push your schools, companies, pensions, and banks to divest from these guys. New York City's pensions have already been divested from private equity funds that fund fossil fuels and private prisons.
There's a lot of policy regulation and disclosure legislation that can happen at the state level. There's always avenues to reach out to elected.
And in fact, the public funds and the ESG, that is the environmental funds, actually do better anyway, so what are we doing? And also, just straight up talking about it, because none of this is getting tackled because it feels like too opaque and complicated to even understand, so just talking about it.
And last but not least, if you're really pissed off and really want to go above and beyond, get in touch with the Private Equity Stakeholder Project. They would love to show you where to go and what to do.
Let us know what you're worried about. We can help connect you.
Also, I forgot to say this, like and subscribe!